able to speak the language of the people that you are trying to educate, whether they are university level or their high school level or whatever, using relevant topics to both engage them, but also make it relatable. And when you're dealing with trauma and you're dealing with really sensitive, touchy subjects, you can get a lot by just seeing what an anonymous person is saying online, because you don't want to completely remove trolls from the equation, because that does form the picture. It's part of the picture of how people conceive about it. They think it's a joke. They think it's important. So that becomes part of the story. This is like truly, I think might be a spicy take, if you will. But I think that anonymous research is best. Obviously, if it's like a Reddit post that has 2 comments and like 1 upvote, that's not really impactful. So I'm looking at those interesting tidbits at a quantitative scale. But it's hard to because sometimes even within the noise, like I was saying, you can find that little nugget.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Honeypot Podcast, where we shine a light on diverse applications of social intelligence. Our guest today is the remarkable Leelan Farhan, a lead UX researcher and PhD candidate in educational technology. Leelan's academic and professional pursuits focus on creating inclusive and safe digital environments through ethical design principles. And we're thrilled to have her share knowledge on leveraging social data, consent education, and the challenges of integrating all that with social intelligence. So let's give a warm welcome to Leelan. Leelan, thank you for coming on today. How are you?
Thanks for having me, Khalil. I'm super stoked. I'm great. Yeah. It's a lovely day here in London, Ontario. And it's great. Yeah. Thanks for having me. How are you doing?
It's great. It's actually cooling off here in the Midwest, so I'm actually happy that I'm not, just walking around sweating profusely everywhere I go.
But, I feel you.
Winding down the summer. Yeah, the summer, man. I'm more of a winter and early fall type of guy. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking forward to that football season coming up, all that good stuff.
Of course, that would be your season, of course.
Exactly. Well, Leelan, before we dive in, we know your expertise really comes around that UX design. I want to make sure we're very clear on the space in your expertise. Like, let's talk about UX for everyone that might not understand what UX is. Very high level, like, what is it? Why is it important? How do you work in that field?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad you asked, because even within the field, I feel like there is a lot of different names for the same thing, essentially, but or a misunderstanding of what UX design is. So like UX obviously stands for user experience. And what that means is making all the different components that make a good user experience. So what does it mean to have a good user experience? And I always love to start by saying, think about a really bad experience that you had. It doesn't even have to be technology. The classic example from Don Norman, who is in many cases known as the founder, quote unquote, of traditional contemporary user experience design. In his book, he mentions the elevator buttons. And we've all had that experience, elevator buttons or doors that are push-pull. Everyone's had the classic experience. Once you think about it, you'll never be able to unthink about it. And the reason I bring those up is because it's a lot, understanding the impact of user experience design I could put out fancy definitions, but really the most salient example of it is when you have a bad experience. Like, everyone has had a bad app experience, a bad checkout experience, a bad customer service experience. And to me, and to many in user experience design, that is all of it. It's the psychology of what is intuitive. So a lot of times user experience design, the word intuitive is thrown around. And what does that even mean? I should not need instructions to use something. That's what that means. People don't read. We know this, okay? A sign on the door could say push or pull, but that's not what the experience is, right? We're visual before we are like reading something. So when it comes to like the classic door example, what we talk about in user experience, and this applies in technology as well, of course, is affordances, right? So user experience design, to sum it all up, is making sure that the psychology of the experience is intuitive, that it follows psychology principles. So like my undergrad was in psychology. That was before I knew what UX is. It's making the experience seamless for the user or a person, just being a human being walking around in the world. And again, I really like to use non-tech examples, because that's when we start to get into the rabbit hole of what UX isn't. It's not graphic design. It's not making things pretty. And I've had jobs before, and many designers have had, user experience designers, where someone will be like, make this deck look pretty, or, do this graphic design thing, or do this marketing deck. And that's not what user experience design is. It is not solely the aesthetic of design. It is about the intuitiveness of the experience. And that's as a classic UX professional, I cannot give you a one sentence answer. So
that's actually perfect. That's actually perfect. And my experience with UX didn't become more apparent until we started Nichefire. So kind of getting people to come test out, and especially on an application where you're trying to provide like insights, right? You have to have a good UX experience, because this space that we're in is very technical, and if you become too hard, people will just be like, get it out of here really quickly. So thank you for explaining it that way, because I think that's very helpful. And again, everyone that may tune in might not be aware of what UX is, so I think that does a great job of kind of bridging that gap right there. So I want to talk about some of the more interesting things, like when we talk about social media data or social insights. How can that type of data inform ethical UX design, especially in context to just consent education, preventing different types of things from happening within certain apps? Like how can social data play into the design, a UX design from those fronts?
Absolutely. I think so many ways. So, when I was thinking about the chats that we were going to have today, I was thinking about, different applications of it. And I'll start with the first thing that came to my mind, and I was exploring a little bit of this on Nichefire, is purely, and this is like the more, I guess, obvious application of it, is understanding what like people are saying about consent education, and not in a traditional way, not like literally looking up consent education, but what are their views on sex and sexuality? How are those changing? What are the hot topics in terms of consent? We know that like frequently, and like in my academic research, this honestly, having Nichefire when I was doing my like data collection would have been super useful, but we're already past that phase. So I'll see what I can sprinkle.
You said that at the booth when we met. You were like, I wish I had this. Like...
Yeah, because yeah, exactly, when we met in DC, because so much. So a little backstory. The reason I mean application of that in particular is before I was doing my PhD, and I think I mentioned this to you at the booth as well when we met. I for like 5-ish years was working with a grassroots organization that's like peer led, so under 30 in the Greater Toronto area, to administer consent education to teens and like in high school settings. Now, as you have kids, Khalil, I'm sure like with working with kids on this topic, you can get in front of teenage boys and capture their attention. You've won the lottery, essentially. And that would have been useful and definitely useful when I was doing my PhD data collection, because of the ways that people talk about incidents in the media that revolve around consent, like celebrity, issues, especially with Me Too. Like, I can't even imagine the power that a tool like Nichefire could have had in Me Too, as like that trend was rising, and seeing how people are talking about it from all angles of the discourse, right? Because that all matters. So from like an education perspective, being able to speak the language of the people that you are trying to educate, whether they are university level or their high school level or whatever, using relevant topics to both engage them, but also make it relatable and also make it real, but also re-educating if there is misinformation around a particular topic. Whenever there is I'll try not to use a particular example, but you can insert whatever relevant salacious media example of some kind of consent or sexual violence, it would inevitably come up in the classroom. So students would ask us about it, or we would talk to them about it. And again, having some kind of social listening would have given us the knowledge and insight around these conversations. It's Twitter, Reddit, Facebook, whatever it was at the time, Tumblr, going into those classrooms of like, okay, this is how youth are conceiving of this topic, even in a university. Again, this is what people are generally saying. And then in terms of like ethical design, it's also like kind of like if you're building a solution for someone for consent education, it's also like you can factor all of that in, like how people are perceiving it. And also it's a tricky topic to do research on. So when I was telling you at the booth, I would have loved this. I was able to, talk to people, but it's a sensitive topic. So being able to almost have an observer role and like have a little ear to like what people are saying. And it's super valuable. Like, of course, as a qual researcher, I want to talk to people directly. But when you're dealing with trauma and you're dealing with really sensitive, touchy subjects, you can get a lot by just seeing what an anonymous person is saying online. Like, obviously, you're not attributing it to any particular person, but what are like these Reddit accounts saying and Reddit threads, and like what are people saying?
Yeah.
But,
That's actually perfect that you wrote that into that, because I wanted to ask next, what are some of those considerations that you need to make when you're using some of this social data in that, that those early stages of that UX research? What, like, does it matter where it comes from? Does it matter how you look at it when it comes from Reddit versus how you look at it when it comes from Twitter or Instagram? Like, could you kind of shed light on how you're looking at it from those perspectives?
Absolutely. And it's something I was thinking about as well. So like, I think this is a side topic that we might cover later, so I won't get ahead of myself. But when it comes to like ethical design and just the way that I think about it, part of that is data, right? So where the data comes from, how anonymous it is. So again, within the topics that I explore, anonymity is important. So how that data is redacted or not redacted, and depending on the questions I'm asking. So like, let's say again, same example I was giving of like what are the youths saying about sexual violence or consent education? How do they view sex and sexuality? Reddit is more anonymous, so I'm more inclined to go there because I feel as a researcher way less invasive in terms of how that data is collected. Obviously, there are arguments in the tech sphere of like it's public data, it's public, especially, again, not going to touch that can of worms yet, but AI, that adds a whole other layer of like data scraping and how that's being used and the around that. But in terms of, using a tool like Nichefire, using social listening, for me, and it's Reddit, I do view it that way. Like it's more anonymous, way little about the person. Usually people are using like throwaway accounts and that kind of a thing, versus Twitter, which kind of can have, I feel like Twitter throwaway accounts have become more of a thing. Obviously, the whole other area of looking at it as well is making sure you eliminate trolls. Like there's like a grain of salt, like especially with a topic like consent education, it becomes difficult because you don't want to completely remove trolls from the equation, because that does form the picture. It's part of the picture of how people conceive about it. They think it's a joke. They think it's important. So that becomes part of the story. But when you're looking for research answers of like, well, how do I make this better? Obviously, that's not helpful. So, I find that Reddit, especially if you're looking at particular subreddits, is really good at like the downvotes are usually people will downvote trolls, again, depending on the subreddit that you're in. If you're in a more like, sexist type subreddit, then you're going to get more of that, etc., picking and choosing. And so, I think there's definitely a methodology of like how you're looking at the data. And I'm glad you asked this question, because I think, especially when like in the industry, when I deliver insights, people are always like they think like the insight that you deliver, and I'm sure you can relate to this, is the tip of the iceberg of all the work that goes behind it. And I mean, that's for any job, I'm sure, but particularly with research, there's so much mental very much Charlie from Always Sunny, like conspiracy theory meme. Like there's a board behind me where all of these lines are connecting in my brain. Yeah, but there's a lot that goes behind how you think about data, whether it's like ethical UX or not in this topic or not. But yeah.
No, that's a great answer, and I think that it's important to talk about that because we've talked about this before. It's just like things are changing how things are being done, and these type of data sets I feel like are traditionally excluded from your type of work because of the academic side of what you guys do, the theory that comes into play in the work that you guys do. And social media doesn't always fit into those realms of things. But when you kind of try to parcel out what it actually is, it's actually people behind, outside of the box and that. But again, you're even calling out how that misinformation sometimes you need to understand that source of misinformation too, because that becomes part of the culture and the behaviors that we kind of spin off from it, because it's still a rock in the pond, if you will, right? It might not even be from a real person, but now this bot has just kind of created, or this troll has kind of created a wave, and it's important to kind of have all of that to take into account when you're doing that. That's a great. I love that you called that out. Us crazy kids and our technology, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But when you kind of touched on it a bit though with privacy, right? How do you balance that user privacy and the need to have that data to improve that consent education on platforms when you don't really necessarily have the privacy to kind of understand what these people are, who these people are from that. And again, I think it's important too to kind of add in the ability to kind of have scale when you're doing it this way, but you don't have the visibility into who it is, what's happening. So like, how does that play into it for UX design?
Absolutely. So in terms of the like a privacy and what have you, it's an interesting conundrum, right? I think, and even UX in general, the balance between, and even from a consumer's perspective, like from a user's perspective, they want personalization, but they also want privacy. So balancing that is also tricky, right? So there's kind of two sides of it. But from a research perspective, privacy is super important. I mean, I'm also like, this is I mean, obviously all of this is my opinion, but this is like truly I think might be a spicy take, if you will. But I think that anonymous research is best. Obviously there's a time and a place. Like I still want to go out and meet people face to face, because you can't really replicate the conversations that you have when you build rapport with somebody. It's really hard to get that deep. But I think in that, you still, like, the most successful research I've done, even when we're talking about face to face, is assuring the user and abiding by this ethical protocol, which definitely I learned from the world of academia, which I'm really grateful for. Is they have the right to redact their information at any time. The results are going to be aggregated anyway, so never highlighting somebody in an advertisement or something like that in an industry setting that didn't consent to that, and just telling them that the results are going to be aggregated. Nobody's going to know that like Emily down the street said this thing, or whoever said this thing, right? And then yeah, for sure, from a social listening side, or even just like a quantitative research side, you also again want to maintain that it's anonymous. And I look at it as like, it's a need to know basis. Like I don't need extra information about a user or like users in general. Like what is it going to add for me? Like if I'm on a platform like working in industry as either as a consultant or at a company, and we already know that our device is fully on a mobile app, for example, like it's a mobile application and there's no website, there's no web version of it. I don't need to know the device type in a survey. I don't need to know like the IP, all of these things. Like I'm a huge fan of, as much as it makes my life difficult as a researcher, like the GDPR regulations and all these like privacy regulations that are coming in, because I think we're all consumers as well. So when we think about, like, you turn your hat off and you think about me, I don't want that data. And I honestly think it's even more of a double-edged sword when you are in tech and you are aware of how we use the data. It kind of, even in your personal life, makes you more paranoid because you see how it's used. I think they're all
Right.
really important, and I just keep it as like, same. That's a protocol in academia. It's like, what do you need to know? And when you go up against an ethics board, that's what they're asking you. Like, are you trying to get more information than you really need for your research study? If so, like, no, you can, remove this PII, personally identifying information. Yeah, I hope that answered your question.
No, that's great. That's a great take on that. And I agree with you 100% because, again, it really boils down to like understanding what you're looking for, understanding what you don't need. Because, again, it's very cumbersome process. And like you were saying to me too, some of that is all face to face work when you're doing that, right? So you got to be very efficient and understand what you're looking for because you don't want to do too much, but then also you need to understand like what do you actually need. There's a lot of information out there, and some companies are, they have more data than they know what to do with it. So that's a great take on that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some inclusive design stuff, right? You try to make something or design it and make it more inclusive. When you're doing that, how have you or any ways that you thought of using social intelligence data to inspire inclusive design work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I definitely like social intelligence is new in my toolbox of user research. So it's definitely something that I'm exploring more in terms of potential. I definitely see the potential in it for sure. I'm going to dial back a little and just explain a little bit about how I approach inclusive design and then how I think that it can, social listening can play a role in that. But I think the biggest thing is I am obviously not all identities that could ever be, right? So when we talk about intersectionality, the most important thing is that you have people in the room that can give you those answers. So again, number one most obvious answer that social listening can provide is giving you insight into maybe demographics. Again, this is a starting point. I would never suggest this is the only way of doing something, but it can give you a good starting point if you don't have access to those groups. Let's say you're, trying to, I've worked at a company where we were building a particular solution and we were having a really hard time getting to a lesbian or queer women demographic. So in that case, I did use social listening tools, manually going through Reddits that I found and then throwing them into social listening tools like Brandwatch, leveraging something like Nishfire to see, first of all, what's important. Like in Nishfire is trends, like what's important to that demographic, right? Being able to split interests by demographic and understanding that. Again, it's a starting point. You still want to go out and talk to these people, whatever group that you're trying to include, and get their experience. But you can get, like, the thing I love about social media, and you were mentioning, is it not being a traditional research method, which is changing. Thankfully, I'm grateful for that. But it's the most raw and real that I think you're ever going to get. I talked about the depth of face to face, which is nice, but people are always going to be nice to you. You're a researcher; they're not going to like tell you to your face. But we've all been, I'm gonna put Air Canada on blast, but I get delayed 5 hours with Air Canada. The first thing I'm doing as a consumer is going on Twitter and being like, "This is the worst airline in the world." You get them in their moment of extreme happiness and extreme pissed offness, right? Their extreme anger, which obviously with that is a grain of salt. But when we're talking about inclusivity, you do get like a really raw look into how people are talking about your brand. If you're trying to include certain demographics that have been excluded historically and you want to change that, then what are your competitors doing? Where are they going that isn't yours? All of these you can get the answers to quickly using social listening tools, and then that can at least help guide your next steps and your strategies for like whatever you want to do next, like talk to them, etc.
Yeah. When you're going through the social listening data or cultural listening data, what are the key metrics that stand out? Like, is it every comment around it? Is it every mention? Like, what are some of those key areas that are like, hey, I should probably look at this, or hey, this could be, is it the sentiment? Like, can you share some secret sauce on that? I know that could be a little proprietary to you. So
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, my method is there's so much. It's so funny. There's a joke within UX researchers that like if you ask them a question, they will their number one answer is it depends. And what I was about to say, where it's like depends what you're asking, but really, like it is so much. What are the questions I'm asking that I want to get answers for? And for me, I do mixed methods research and I do love my quantitative, but the best, most interesting thing about qualitative insights, which I think social listening does help you pull out at a quantitative scale, is holy crap, that's an interesting comment. Like it's something that you notice where it might be an out for me, it's something that breaks the hypothesis that I had going into it. So it's something that somebody said in a thread or something like that that puts into perspective the question or the answer in a way that I was not anticipating whatsoever. So like for example, I'm working with a client and I'm using social listening to understand something and I see that we thought that the reason that users are using our competitor is because it is more inclusive. Let's say that they have better categories and stuff. But then I go on a social listening tool and I see that there's like somebody posted about the competitor in a subreddit and there's lots of comments around it. That's another like signal for me is like, did the post get a lot of traction? Obviously, if it's like a Reddit post that has 2 comments and like 1 upvote, that's not really impactful. So I'm looking at those interesting tidbits at a quantitative scale. But so yeah, let's say they post about the competitor and we find out actually it's because their search function works really well. So even though they're not inclusive, they can still find what they're looking for because of the search, the way the search is designed, right? So for me, it's things that take me by surprise as a researcher. Those are the things that I love the most that are really salient. And then that will typically send me down a rabbit hole of like, oh, I want to find out more about this. I need to ask more questions. I might go back and like completely redesign and rewrite the questions and answers that I initially thought like were to be. So, yeah.
hmm so how do you? And this kind of you're perfect. You're the perfect interviewee because the topics are flowing right into the next question perfectly for
Thank you
me.
so much.
So when you talk about listening to that social listening data, though, how do you differentiate between the what's like you kind of showed like understanding like that qualitative side, understanding what's valuable and what's noise, but like those tools can get very noisy. So how do you kind of get by that, especially when you're trying to understand something like like consent education, right? Like, or making sure that you identify areas where you can educate for that particular
Yeah.
topic. How do you differentiate the noise in a topic like that?
Yeah, it's this great question. The first thing that I will say, and Nichefire makes this a lot easier, I think, than traditional social listening, is writing your query out. That is everything. It's like the language that you're using and the keywords that you're using and how you filter out the noise. This is a technical answer, but it is the honest answer. That's how you filter it out. And obviously that comes
Yeah.
with practice. But then I would also say it's 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 hard to because sometimes even within the noise, like I was saying, you can find that little nugget. So that would be the first thing, yeah, query writing. But then something like just to highlight Nichefire for a second, because it's like a complementary tool to social listening. I remember you were saying this in the pitches and in the discussions that we had together of like it's showing you what could possibly be a trend before it is. So I don't need to know those language. So if we're talking about consent education, I need some starting trends, but then I could see how, oh, this topic and unfortunately, consent is politicized. So politics is going to be the area that I will probably find it the most, the category that I would find it the most. So it's looking within those categories and seeing things that are adjacent. Again, like it's as I'm sure you know, the it's a super fine line and honestly like a Venn diagram of what's noise and what is a nugget of gold. So sometimes I will hunt through the noise, even though it's very tedious, to find a nugget, because sometimes,
Mhm.
you don't want to overcorrect. So if anything, I'm always okay with a little bit of noise, because that might still get me something that I didn't necessarily think of. But yeah, both being able to hunt for keywords that, so like being adaptable, right? Like if I'm searching and I'm like, oh, these, like I wouldn't search like consent education, I might search um like how to stuff, right? Like how to do certain things. Or
Mhm.
a great kind of subreddit that I've discovered recently is body language, r/body language.
Okay.
And it's a bunch of clearly teen
Or
girls being like, I was at the gym and is this girl making eyes at me? So like figuring, like that's something I would, as I learn about it, I would plug that into a social listening tool. So it's always, I think my biggest tip to people if they're using social listening tools that I found success with is not using the language that you think your user is using. Just go and look at the noise first,
exactly.
figure out, oh, okay, that's how they're talking about it. That's how they're talking about it. And then go back, iterate, and use the terms that you're seeing come up, because that's, you're trying to speak. So often I see technical people using the technical language that we use internally, and it's like the consumer is
Yeah.
not talking
Yeah.
about our product like that. Like, so yeah.
Yeah. You have to go look into like Riz, R
Exactly.
Riz, or
Exactly.
like you said, our body language.
Exactly. Well, now I'm getting like,
The areas where these type of conversations, yeah,
exactly.
because that's where the education needs to be.
Exactly.
Do you ever feel like? Do you ever feel like that? Because I think that social media as a channel could be the one of the main culprits of the miseducation, the toxic masculinity, um, you know, those type of things being kind of promoted to just people in general that could be muddying the waters for what you're actually trying to design and help improve on. So, how do you get through that barrier, understanding that while looking into these channels for insights and understanding these in your research, on top of the other types of research that you're doing, do you ever feel inclined to like step in and like tell someone, or like how do you address that? Because I know you see it all the time in our body
Yeah.
language or
Yeah.
in our Riz
Yeah.
or these places where you see these people have these crazy ideals on romance, relationships, how to talk to people that they're interested in. So like, do you ever feel inclined to like do something about that, or can you do anything like that with the design work that you do?
Yeah. That's the goal. That's what I'm trying to do. So you kind of helped me answer that at the end, but as a researcher, that is the trickiest part, and so real. Like, it is a lot, especially as a woman doing this work. I do have to step away. Like, first of all, say that. Like, it's hard. It's why my PhD work has taken me so many years. It's a tough topic to do a 9 to 5, 40-hour week on.
Yeah,
There's a lot of that out there in the world. There's a lot of that nonsense. Um, but optimistically, and I'm so glad you brought that up in terms of design. That is why when I discovered ethical design, or design justice is a framework that I love by an former MIT scholar, Sasha Costanza Chalk. I can shoot you a reference after, we can include it, or I'll put it in the LinkedIn post once it's up. But I just want to attribute
okay.
that to them. They are a fantastic scholar that wrote a book that's super accessible on design justice. And really, that's the idea, is like, yes, of course, we are not under the delusion that we are going to remove all toxicity and, you know, uh, uh, how do I frame this? Like, in a non-politically charged way, which is difficult, right? I do believe that design is political.
Yeah.
It does leave people out and includes others. So to do design in an inclusive way, you're not going to eliminate everything that's bad in design, bad however you want to phrase it, but the goal is to make design more democratized and give people the tools to go in their communities and solve these problems using design frameworks. So in my doctoral work, that's kind of what I'm doing. When I met with students, it was to collaboratively build a design solution. So one of the proponents of design
Mhm.
justice, like principles, is that I am not above my user, like my, even the word user, I'm not above the other person, that I'm looking at the end. We want to like create a solution together. And so I
Mhm.
do believe that design has the power to do it. And I've seen like lots of case study examples in which that happens. The key in terms of, do I ever feel inclined to step in? That's the tricky part of being a researcher. So what I was saying, I have to step away because it's hard. Like, we're human beings and we have our values and we have our things. And I'm getting heated and I need to step away because I'm supposed to be quote unquote neutral. Now I have my thoughts on that, but I cannot simply, if I'm here to just
Mhm.
observe and do research, then I simply cannot. But I do believe that we can create solutions that can intervene in social media and in these ways. I'm really like, not as much as we can talk about how social media damages kids and it damages lots of things, we can also think of a million different examples in which it has empowered people around the world that have not had a voice
Mhm.
um, to put their concerns and their grievances on a platform. And even like we talk about consent education, I brought up Me Too. Like, that was literally a hashtag that started on social media. So yes, of course you get this
Yep.
like divide, but we can definitely still create interventions as well that I think can be successful.
Mhm.
But yeah.
Okay. That's a great answer, and I guess it's actually um, kind of bringing everything full circle because my last question for you today is really around social data and how, like, what place does it play in the future of ethical UX, qualitative research? I mean, we got podcasts now. We have Twitch streaming data that's out there that's considered like social data, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. We have so many different platforms now that demand our attention. Whether, I mean, there's so many different ones for people to choose from now. What role will that play in the future of the research that you're doing, in the future of UX design practices? How does that fit in?
Yeah.
And what does the industry need to start taking in consideration around these different data channels?
One of the first things that I'll say is socialist already, I can already see this having an impact in me and my work, and so I can only imagine it will go further, is seeing how generational values are changing. So when we talk
Mhm.
about Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and as they get older, I am noticing, and in recent user research that I've done, there are generational shifts in values. I mean, there always are, but those are super important. And having all of those, like you said, channels that demand our attention to tap into it, but I also is going to be illuminating from a social listening perspective. But on the other hand, now again, spicy take number two that I've been thinking about for a while
Hey.
is that one of the value shifts that I've noticed in youth, again, this is anecdotal research experience from me, though I am starting to see articles come up validating this point, is that uh, youth are becoming more privacy aware and like in a way that is authentic. Like, I remember when the Snowden
Mhm.
thing happened, even academically, we were all saying, oh, like I was literally in a surveillance and privacy class and everybody was like, oh, they're not going to care. Like, citizens don't, like, something happens, it's a trend and then they don't care anymore. That was true then, I would say, of millennials, Gen X, and all of us that are older. I see that that's shifting in the youth. And something that I anticipate, I could be wrong, maybe not to an extreme, is that youth will pull back as they get older in their technology usage as well. So that's going to be interesting too, to see
Mhm.
where the future of social media is going to go. Like, you see like Gen Z and Alpha posting less on Instagram. They might use their stories, but they really don't post on their feed. That's like chuggy, I guess, to do these days. Like all of these things. And I think I'm seeing a trend in which they're going to become way more conscious and way more demanding of tech companies. So, like, as an industry as a whole, whether we're talking about social listening or just tech in general, I think we have to be very cognizant of what if there comes a time where consumers are not that interested in putting their whole lives on social media anymore. what do we do in that case? But this
No,
is
no,
super long term thinking as I'm thinking about it. But
no, that's a great take on it, and I think you're 100% right. I want to call out a couple trends. I need to maybe I'll do one of those cool edit tricks when I'll make them pop up on the screen. But there are a number of unplug slash go for a walk type of trends emerging from Gen Zs and Gen Alpha when we were doing some trend analysis on those demographics. So I think you're right about that. I do think that outside of the TikTok and the YouTubes, those younger generations are pulling back from social, but that attention still is going to other platforms. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes because I don't think it'll completely go away. Um, it's just evolving, and I think the content with AI is going to shift to more video led and things that you can't reproduce very easily with AI. But I think that all of these things would play into your world because, again, you are definitely trying to use this tool more so on that, not when you're in the thick of the research, but in the beginning, right? To help you understand how, which way to go because I would imagine sometimes you may do some research and it takes you down the wrong way, and now you got to start over because you found something new along your way, right? So hopefully it can start being used in that way. And I think that was like the overall battle cry of the conference that we met at, really with us there and some other social listening tools, but then also Frank Gregory kind of driving home his tool stack and how he's using things over at Nestle and how in depth that process is and how traditional market research folks at his organization are leveraging it. So, Leland, this has been a pleasure. I really appreciate you sitting through all these grueling questions that I
oh no,
asked
it
you
was
today.
so much fun.
It's always a pleasure. Before we sign off, I wanted to ask you: do you want to take some time to promote? I know you talked about some work that you have publicized that's coming out or anything. Use this time to kind of send people to your LinkedIn or anything.
Thank you so
Go
much.
ahead and
I
you can have
appreciate
your final say, and I'll sign the episode off after
I
that.
appreciate it. Yeah. People can find me. I'm still working on my publications for my dissertation. So those will come out, and academia works so slowly in that regard. But you can find me at my website, leelanfarhan.com, or on LinkedIn as Leelan Farhan. I'm sure I will be tagging whatever this comes up. But yeah, that's it for now. And yeah, as a plug, if anyone wants to talk about inclusive design or more about anything that I talked about in this wonderful little interview podcast, yeah, feel free to reach out to me. And thank you so much, Khalil. It was so lovely. And if you think those questions are grueling, trust me, go sit in front of an academic committee, and it's not incomparable. So,
Well, good. Well, I hope that was a nice change up for you because I know you have to do those a lot.
yeah,
But I just really appreciate you joining us for the Honeypot Podcast. We really enjoyed our conversation with you around UX design and social intelligence. Um, like Leland said, check her out at her website. I'll make sure that all her information is in the show notes and all that good stuff. And make sure you guys, like, subscribe, share this with your, colleagues. We love to get the word out about, you know, using social intelligence in ways that expand outside of marketing. So until next time, we'll keep pushing these boundaries, and we hope that everyone has a great day. Peace. All right, let me stop
awesome.
recording.